Three men stood at the edge of the street, identical in every way that mattered. Each of them 6 feet 7 inches tall, massive frames that seemed carved from granite rather than born from flesh. The same chestnut hair, the same amber eyes like whiskey held up to firelight, and all three of them staring at her with hunger so intense it felt physical, like she was something they had been waiting for, something they had been starving for. But before Sable understood what that hunger meant, before she knew the price of salvation, she had to run. Run from the man who called himself her guardian but wanted to make her his possession. Run 2,000 miles into a wilderness that killed women in four ways: childbirth, disease, accidents, and violence. She thought she was escaping one cage. She had no idea she was choosing another. One with three locks, three keys, three identical men who would share everything, including her. But before we dive into Sable's impossible choice, comment below where you are watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. And if you enjoy these stories of love survival in the wild frontier where society's rules meant nothing, subscribe for new videos every week. Your support means everything. Now let us return to Sable, to the night she ran, to the moment everything changed. The snow had been falling since midnight. It fell without wind, straight down from a sky the color of old iron, each flake small and dry and patient. By 3 in the morning, Boston lay silent under its white shroud, the streets empty save for a single figure running through the darkness. Sable Ashford ran like a woman with death at her heels, because she was. She wore only a navy traveling dress and thin cloak, inadequate against the December cold that bit through fabric and skin straight to bone. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her in wild waves. In her arms, she clutched a worn leather Bible and a small cloth purse containing $23, 6 months of patient theft, one coin at a time, from the desk drawer of the man who called himself her guardian. The man who had promised that in 2 days on Christmas Eve, he would make her his wife in every sense of the word. Her breath came in white clouds, her lungs burning with each inhale. Behind her, the Penhallows estate sat, dark and imposing on Beacon Hill, all its windows like blind eyes. She did not look back. Looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation meant capture, and capture meant a wedding night that would end with her body used and broken, just like Abigail Pierce and Constance Lowell before her. Those two names haunted her. Two young women, both previous wards of Osric Penhallow, both dead within weeks of marrying him, both leaving him their inheritances. She had found the death certificates hidden in his study, tucked behind a false panel, alongside a ledger that documented every bribe, every forged document, every stolen penny. She had taken the ledger, slipped it into her purse alongside the stolen coins. Insurance, she told herself. The last desperate act of a woman who had learned that evidence was the only weapon the powerless possessed. The convent appeared through the snow like salvation made of stone. The Sisters of Mercy occupied a gray fortress at the edge of the city, its walls 2 feet thick, built 2 centuries ago to withstand both winter and wickedness. Sable fell against the heavy wooden door and pounded with fists that had gone numb, pounded until her knuckles split and bled dark spots into the snow at her feet. The door opened. A nun stood silhouetted against warm lamplight, her face creased with sleep and concern. Sable fell to her knees on the threshold. Sanctuary, she tried to say, but her throat had closed around the word. So she simply held out her bleeding hands and let the tears come, silent and desperate, the tears of a woman who had finally run out of places to run. The nun, young and kind-faced, helped her inside, led her through corridors that smelled of beeswax and old incense, brought her to a room where an ancient woman sat beside a fire, rosary beads clicking through weathered fingers. Mother Odette Marchand was 82 years old. She had steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, sharp as broken glass, set in a face mapped with lines that told stories of hard choices and harder mercies. She gestured for Sable to sit, said nothing, simply waited. So Sable told her story, all of it. Her voice cracked and faltered, but did not stop. She spoke of her father, Reverend Edmund Ashford, who had taught her Latin and Greek and died believing his daughter would be cared for. Of her mother, Lillian, who had taught her dignity and died too soon to protect her. Of Osric Penhallow, deacon and merchant, who had seemed kind until the door closed and the mask came off. 2 years of imprisonment disguised as guardianship. 2 years of locked doors and controlled meals, and hands that grabbed and threatened but never quite crossed the final line, because Osric Penhallow was a patient man who preferred his victims compliant before he consumed them. She told Mother Odette about the documents hidden in Osric's study, the death certificates of two previous wards, both young women, both dead, within weeks of marrying him, both leaving him their inheritances. She told her about the night 3 days ago when Osric had come to her room at midnight, whiskey-breathed and cold-eyed, and informed her that on Christmas Eve she would become his wife and he would finally claim what he had purchased. When she finished, this room was silent except for the click of rosary beads and the snap of logs in the fire. Mother Odette studied her for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Sable's bleeding hands in her own. "You can stay here 3 months," the old woman said. Her voice was rough as tree bark, gentle as benediction. "After that, he will have legal grounds to retrieve you. The law gives guardians power until their wards reach 21, and you are still 20. Your birthday is not until March." Sable felt hope drain from her body like blood from a wound. 3 months was not enough. Osric would wait. He was good at waiting. He would come for her the day the law allowed, and this time there would be no escape. But Mother Odette continued, and her eyes gleamed with something that might have been mischief or might have been grace. "I may have a solution." "Tell me, child, how do you feel about mountains?" The old nun rose from her chair, moving with surprising steadiness for a woman of her years. She crossed to her desk and withdrew paper and pen. 3 years ago, a man from the Colorado Territory delivered timber for our chapel repairs. He was a hard man, a frontier man, but honest. When I offered payment, he refused. Said the work was for forgone and needed no earthly compensation. Mother Odette's handwriting was cramped but elegant, the script of someone educated in an era when penmanship was prayer. "His name is Prentice Calloway. He lives in the high country with his 2 brothers. Identical triplets, all of them, though I only met Prentice. They have been alone on that mountain for 8 years now, since his wife died." She wrote quickly, not looking up. "They are good men in their way. Rough, yes. Unconventional, certainly. But I believe they will protect you, and protection is what you need most." "What do you want me to do?" Sable asked. "Survive," Mother Odette said simply. "Go west. Come someone Osric Penhallow cannot reach." She sealed the letter with wax, pressed her ring into the soft red pool. Then she looked at Sable with ancient eyes that held no illusions about the world or its cruelties. "I am going to tell Prentice Calloway that I am sending him a young woman, my novice sister, who has fallen ill with consumption and needs mountain air to survive the winter. He will take you in as charity, as Christian duty." "But that is a lie," Sable whispered. "Yes," Mother Odette agreed. "It is." She held out the sealed letter. "The question is whether you would rather die honest in Boston or live dishonest in Colorado. Choose quickly, child. Dawn is coming, and with it discovery." Sable took the letter. Her hands had stopped shaking. The next morning, Mother Odette purchased a train ticket with convent funds. She pressed it into Sable's palm along with a small purse containing an additional $30 and a worn copy of the King James Bible. "This was your father's," she said. "I wrote to him years ago about church matters. He sent this in return with a note inside. I think perhaps he meant for you to have it one day." Sable opened the Bible. There on the inside cover in her father's familiar script, "Sable, if you are reading this after I am gone, remember this. Freedom is not the absence of bonds. Freedom is choosing which bonds to accept." She did not understand the words. Not then. But she held the Bible close as the train pulled away from Boston, as the city disappeared behind her in a cloud of steam and snow, as everything she had ever known became smaller and smaller, until it vanished entirely. The journey west took 6 days. Boston to New York on Christmas Eve, the train car crowded with families and merchants, everyone bundled against cold that seeped through the windows in waves. Sable kept to herself in a corner seat, hat pulled low, watching the world transform outside the frost-covered glass. Every face that passed her in the aisle made her flinch. Every man in a dark coat made her heart stutter. She kept expecting Osric's cold eyes to appear, his hand to close around her arm, his voice to say the words she had heard in nightmares for 2 years. "Come home, Catherine. Come home." He always called her Catherine, never Sable. As if by refusing to use the name she had chosen for herself, he could erase the person she was becoming and keep only the possession he intended to own. In New York, she changed trains, spent an uncomfortable night in a boarding house near the station, sleeping with her back against the door and the Bible clutched to her chest. The sounds of the city leaked through thin walls. Laughter, arguments, the distant wail of a street musician playing something mournful on a violin. She lay awake and thought about what she was doing. Running toward a man she had never met on the strength of a letter full of lies, carrying everything she owned in a single bag. But morning came without incident, and she boarded the westbound express that would carry her into the unknown. New York to Chicago took 2 days. The landscape flattened into endless winter plains, farmhouses, squatting low against horizons that stretched forever. She shared a bench with an elderly woman named Dorinda Yates, a widow traveling to Denver to open a boarding house after her husband's death. Dorinda was small and weathered with hands that had clearly known decades of hard work. Her eyes were bright behind spectacles that sat slightly crooked on her nose, and she spoke with the unhurried cadence of a woman who had outlived her need to impress anyone. "You are very young to be traveling alone," Dorinda observed. Her voice held no judgment, only curiosity worn smooth by years. "I'm going to family," Sable lied. "In Colorado. They need help with the household." Dorinda studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled. She glanced at Sable's hands, at the healing cuts on her knuckles, at the way she startled when the conductor passed through the car. Then she smiled a smile that was equal parts kindness and understanding. "Family we choose is often better than family we are born to. I hope you find what you are looking for, child. Or better yet, I hope you find something you did not know you needed." The words stayed with Sable long after Dorinda disembarked in Omaha, pressing a small card into her hand with the address of her boarding house in Denver. "In case you need a friend," the old woman said. "Everyone needs at least one." Chicago to Denver took another 3 days. The train climbed slowly into thin air and thinner civilization. The passengers changed. Fewer suits and dresses, more buckskin and wool. Fewer soft hands, more scars and calluses. The men carried rifles as casually as Boston gentlemen carried walking sticks. The women had eyes like flint faces that told stories of survival without the luxury of complaint. Sable read her father's Bible and tried not to think about what waited at the end of the line. She turned the pages slowly, finding comfort in the familiar weight of the book, in the marginal notes her father had left in his small, precise handwriting. Beside the 23rd Psalm, he had written, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is walking forward while afraid." She wondered if he had known somehow that his daughter would one day need those words more than any sermon he had ever delivered. Denver was a city trying to pretend it was civilized. Brick buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high, but between them gaped vacant lots and tent camps. The streets were half paved, half mud. The air smelled of coal smoke and horse dung, and something wild that came down from the mountains, something clean and ancient and utterly indifferent to human ambition. Mother Odette had arranged for Sable to spend one night at the Denver Sisters of Mercy convent. A different building, same order, same commitment to sheltering the desperate. Sister Rosalind met her at the door. She was 45, lean as a whip, with skin weathered by years of frontier sun before she had taken her vows. Her handshake was firm enough to crack walnuts, and her eyes held the particular sharpness of someone who had survived things she would never discuss at polite tables. "So you are Mother Odette's lost lamb, Sister," Rosalind said. She led Sable to a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked west toward mountains that scraped the sky. The peaks were enormous, far larger than Sable had imagined, blue and white, and ancient, filling the horizon like the spine of the world. "You know what you are walking into?" Sable shook her head. Sister Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed. Her posture was straight as a rifle barrel, and when she spoke, her voice carried the flat authority of a woman who had earned every word through suffering. "I lived out there for 10 years before I came here. Buried 2 husbands and 3 children. The frontier kills women in 4 ways: childbirth, disease, accidents, and violence. In that order." She looked at Sable with eyes that held no softness. "But the women who survive become something society does not have a name for. They run ranches, they set bones and deliver babies. Some of them even wear badges. The wilderness burns away everything weak, everything borrowed. What remains is pure, true." Sister Rosalind stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had taken so much from her. "The question is not whether you will suffer, child. You will. The question is whether you will let that suffering destroy you or forge you into something harder than the men who think they own you. Sable slept poorly that night, dreaming of fire and ice and hands reaching for her through darkness. In the dream, Osric's face kept shifting, becoming other faces, becoming the faces of men she had not yet met, men with amber eyes and shoulders broad enough to blot out the sky. She woke gasping, unsure whether the dream had been a warning or a promise. Morning came cold and clear. The sky was a shade of blue she had never seen in Boston, so deep and sharp, it looked like it might cut her if she stared too long. Sister Rosalind walked her to the stagecoach depot, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs into her hands. For bleeding, for fever, for pain, she said. Her voice was brisk, practical, but her hand lingered on Sable's for just a moment. Learn to heal yourself. No one else will do it for you. Then she stepped back and something softened in her face just briefly, like sunlight breaking through clouds before the wind pushed them back together. God go with you, child, and if he does not go anyway. The stagecoach was smaller than Sable had imagined, barely large enough for 6 passengers and their luggage. The wooden body was scarred and weather-beaten, the leather seats cracked, the windows scratched to near opacity. It smelled of tobacco and leather and the accumulated sweat of 1,000 journeys into the unknown. 4 others were already seated when she climbed aboard. An old prospector with skin like tan leather and eyes that had seen too much gold and too much death. He introduced himself as Zedekiah Moss, heading back to his claim after selling dust in Denver. His beard was white and full, his hands gnarled as old tree roots, and when he smiled, which was often, he revealed a gap where his front teeth should have been. But his eyes were gentle, and when he helped Sable with her bag, his courtesy had the easy grace of a man who had not yet forgotten that women deserve kindness. A young married couple, Hollis and Temperance Braxton, fresh-faced and eager, traveling to start a ranch near Pine Ridge. Hollis was tall and thin, with the scrubbed look of a schoolteacher who had traded chalk dust for trail dust. Temperance was small and fierce, with red hair and freckles and a jaw that suggested she did not suffer fools or adversity with anything less than full resistance. They held hands like drowning people clutching driftwood, and a man who made Sable's skin crawl the moment she saw him. He was perhaps 40, lean and weathered, dressed in buckskin that had been worn soft with use. His hair was dark, streaked with gray. His eyes were pale, the color of winter ice, and they sat in deep sockets that made his face look hollow, almost skull-like. He held a rifle across his knees, like it was part of his body, like it had grown there, like separating him from the weapon would require surgery rather than simple asking. Judson Farrow, he said, when she met his gaze. Folks call me Judd. His voice was rough as gravel, the voice of a man who spent most of his time alone and had forgotten how to modulate for company. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, Sable felt something predatory in his stare, like he was measuring her worth, calculating her weakness, not with lust exactly, but with something worse, recognition, as if he saw in her a ghost he had been trying to forget. Temperance Braxton noticed. She shifted in her seat, positioning herself between Sable and Judson, and gave the hunter a look that could have frozen whiskey in its glass. The stagecoach lurched into motion. Denver fell away behind them as they climbed into country that grew wilder with each mile. Pine forests thick enough to swallow armies. Valleys so deep the sun never reached their floors. Mountains that rose like the bones of God breaking through the earth. The road, if it could be called a road, was little more than a scar through the wilderness, winding upward through switchbacks that made the stagecoach groan and sway. Sable kept her eyes on the window and tried to ignore the way Judson watched her. His gaze returned to her again and again, not with the obvious hunger of a man sizing up a woman, but with something quieter and more disturbing. Familiarity, as if she reminded him of someone. As if seeing her caused him pain he was determined to swallow without flinching. She heard the Braxtons whispering when they thought she was sleeping. That is Judson Farrow Hollis murmured, his voice barely audible above the rattle of the wheels. Lives up past Pine Ridge like a hermit. Story is he loved a woman once. She married someone else. Then she died in the snow. Suspicious circumstances. Temperance shushed him, but not before Sable heard. Not before the words planted themselves like thorns in her mind. A woman who died in the snow. A man who loved her and lost her to someone else. Suspicious circumstances. She filed the words away beside the other, fears she was collecting a growing catalog of dangers that waited at the end of this journey. But she did not turn back, could not turn back, because behind her was Osric Penhallow and his forged marriage plans and his patient, methodical destruction of every woman unlucky enough to fall into his care. And ahead of her was the unknown, which was terrifying, yes, but at least held the possibility of something other than ruin. Old Zedekiah caught her eye across the swaying coach and winked. "Chin up, Missy," he said. "Whatever is chasing you, it cannot climb as fast as this coach." "Nothing is chasing me," Sable lied. Zedekiah smiled his gap-toothed smile. "Course not. Just like nothing is chasing any of us. We are all just headed west because we love the scenery." He tipped his battered hat and closed his eyes to sleep, leaving Sable with the distinct impression that the old prospector saw more than he let on. They reached Pine Ridge on the evening of December 30th, just as twilight bled the last color from the sky. The town was small, barely more than a main street, with buildings hunched against the cold, like old men around a fire. General store, church, saloon, boarding house. Perhaps 200 people lived here, scattered across the valley and up into the surrounding hills. Smoke rose from every chimney, the only signs of life in a landscape that seemed designed to discourage it. The temperature had dropped below zero. Sable's breath made white clouds in the air, even inside the stagecoach. When the driver opened the door, the cold hit like a physical blow, like stepping into water, so cold it stopped the heart. She stepped down into snow that came up past her ankles. Her legs shook from the long ride. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache. Her thin cloak, adequate for Boston winters that now seemed laughably mild, might as well have been made of paper against this cold. This was a different kind of cold entirely. Not the damp chill of the eastern seaboard, but something drier and deeper. Something that reached past skin and muscle and bone and gripped the very core of a person, squeezing heat from the body the way a hand wrings water from cloth. And then she saw them. 3 men stood at the edge of the street, not men giants. Each of them had to be at least 6 feet 7 inches tall, maybe taller. They were identical in every way that mattered. The same massive framed shoulders, so broad they seemed to block out what remained of the light. The same thick muscular builds that made them look carved from granite rather than born from flesh. The same tan skin weathered by years of outdoor labor. The same chestnut brown hair with sun-streaked highlights, medium length and naturally tousled. The same unusual eyes, a warm amber color like whiskey held up to firelight. But it was not just their size or their identical appearance that made Sable's heart skip. It was the intensity with which they looked at her. All 3 of them staring with focus so complete it felt physical, like she was something they had been waiting for, something they had been hungry for. Like the mountain and the winter and the 8 years of isolation had hollowed them out, and she was the first thing to fill that emptiness. The one in the middle wore no bandana. The one to his right wore burgundy red. The one to his left wore navy blue. That seemed to be the only way to tell them apart. Before anyone could speak, Judson Farrow stepped down from the stagecoach. He looked at the 3 brothers, and something ugly twisted his weathered face. A complex expression, part hatred, part jealousy, part grief so old it had calcified into something that resembled madness. "Callaways," he said. The word sounded like an insult. "I heard you have a new guest coming." The middle brother, the one without a bandana, took a step forward. His voice was deep controlled, with a slight rasp that suggested he did not use it often. The voice of a man accustomed to silence, who chose his words the way a carpenter chose nails, each one deliberate, each one driven home with precision. "Farrow, walk away. Now," Judson smiled, showing teeth. "Does she know?" He gestured toward Sable. "Does she know about Verity, about how you 3 shared her like property?" The brother in the red bandana moved faster than something his size should be able to move. One moment he stood still, the next his hand was fisted in Judson's buckskin shirt, lifting the smaller man onto his toes. The movement was so swift and so violent that Sable took an involuntary step backward, bumping into Temperance, who steadied her with a firm hand. "Say my wife's name again," the red bandana brother growled, "and I will break your jaw." Sable's mind caught on the words. My wife, singular. Not our wife, my wife. The possessive was fierce territorial, the claim of a man who still loved a dead woman so deeply that even the sound of her name on another man's lips was an act of violation. Judson laughed a sound like broken glass. Your wife, she was Prentice's wife. You and Nevin were just scavengers picking at his leavings. The brother in the blue bandana grabbed the one in red, pulled him back before violence could escalate. Easy, Rafferty. He is not worth it. His voice was calmer than his brother's, steadier. But beneath the measured tone was a current of anger, just as deep, just as dangerous, held in check by discipline rather than temperament. Judson straightened his shirt, still smiling. He looked at Sable one last time. Good luck, miss. You are going to need it. Then he walked away into the gathering dark. His boots crunched in the snow, the sound growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the vast silence of the mountain. But even after he disappeared, his words remained hanging in the cold air like smoke. The silence that followed felt enormous. Temperance Braxton whispered something to her husband, and Sable caught the words 8 years ago. Christmas Eve found in the snow. The middle brother approached slowly, each step deliberate, as if he understood that his size could intimidate and wanted to give her the chance to adjust. When he stopped in front of Sable, she had to tilt her head back to look at his face. He was even bigger up close. His hand, when he offered it, could have easily spanned her entire waist. Miss Ashford. His voice was deep, controlled. I am Prentice Calloway. Sable placed her small hand in his massive one. His palm was warm despite the cold callus. From years of labor that had hardened skin into something close to leather, careful in the way it closed around her fingers, gentle despite the obvious strength. The contrast between the size of his hand and the tenderness of his grip was startling. This was a man who understood his own power and chose deliberately to restrain it. Mr. Calloway, thank you for meeting me. His amber eyes searched her face. Up close, she could see they were not simply one color, but flecked with gold and brown, like autumn leaves in sunlight. There was intelligence in those eyes, weariness, and underneath it all, a hunger he was trying very hard to control. Mother Superior did not mention I had 2 brothers. Mother Superior mentioned you needed somewhere safe. He released her hand. We can provide that. The details can wait until we reach the cabin. The brother in the red bandana stepped forward. He was equally massive, equally intense. But where Prentice seemed controlled, this one seemed barely restrained. Energy radiated from him like heat from a stove, a constant vibration of emotion and impulse held in check by nothing more than willpower. Rafferty Calloway, pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Ashford. His voice was rougher than Prentice's rawer, and when he took her hand, his grip was firmer. Not painful, but insistent. The handshake of a man who wanted her to feel his presence, to understand that he was there and would not be overlooked. The third brother, wearing the blue bandana, came to stand beside them. He had the same face, the same body, but his eyes held something gentler. Or perhaps just better camouflaged. Where Prentice controlled his intensity and Rafferty barely contained his, this one seemed to have transformed his into something softer, redirected it into warmth rather than heat. Nevin Calloway, most folks call me Nev. Welcome to Pine Ridge. Sable looked from one identical face to another and felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. 3 of them. Mother Odette's letter had said nothing about brothers, had said nothing about whatever arrangement these men had shared with someone named Verity. She thought of the words Judson had spoken. Shared her like property. She thought of the whispered conversation between the Braxtons. Found in the snow, she thought of Sister Rosalind's warning. The frontier kills women in 4 ways. And she thought of Osric Penhallow waiting in Boston with his forged documents and his patient cruelty, and she understood that whatever waited on this mountain, it could not possibly be worse than what she had left behind. We need to go, Prentice said. The cabin is 7 miles up the mountain, and the temperature is dropping. Ken U-Ride Sable had ridden exactly twice in her life, both times on a gentle mare at a neighbor's farm, both times at a walk, both times with her father holding the reins. But looking at these 3 massive men, at the intensity in their identical amber eyes, at the snow beginning to fall again in those same small, dry, patient flakes, she understood she had reached a decision point. She could refuse, could demand they take her back to Denver on the next stage, could run back to the convent and beg for a different solution. Or she could trust, could take a leap into the unknown, could believe that these 3 massive, intimidating, strangely compelling men might be her salvation rather than her doom. I can learn, she said. Something shifted in Prentice's expression, not quite a smile, but close. The barest softening of that granite face, like the first crack in winter ice that signals the coming of spring. Yes, he said softly. I believe you can. They helped her onto Lucy, a bay mare who stood patiently while Sable arranged her skirts and found her seat. Nevin tied her small carpet bag securely behind the saddle, his fingers working the knots, with the easy competence of a man who had tied 1,000 such knots and could do it blindfolded in a blizzard. Rafferty made sure her feet were properly in the stirrups, adjusting the length with quick, sure movements, his massive hands surprisingly deft. Prentice mounted his own horse with easy grace and positioned himself beside her. "Stay close to me," he said. "The trail is steep in places. If you feel yourself slipping, call out. I will catch you." The words were simple, practical, the instructions of a man responsible for another person's safety on a dangerous trail. But something in the way he said them, in the quiet certainty of his voice, made Sable believe he was making a promise that extended far beyond the next 2 hours, far beyond this single ride up a snowy mountain. "I will catch you," as if he had been waiting to catch someone for a very long time. The ride up the mountain took 2 hours. The trail wound through dense pine forest where snow clung to every branch, creating a world of black and white. The trees were enormous, older than memory, their trunks wider than a man could wrap his arms around. They rose like columns in some vast natural cathedral, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that filtered the last remaining light into something blue and ghostly. The air grew thinner, colder, until each breath burned Sable's lungs. Her thighs ached from gripping the horse. Her hands grew numb even inside her gloves. The trail climbed relentlessly, switching back and forth across the face of the mountain, sometimes narrowing to barely the width of a single horse, the ground dropping away on one side into darkness so deep it seemed to have no bottom. But she did not complain. She simply followed Prentice's broad back and tried not to think about how far from civilization they were traveling. Each mile took her further from everything she knew, further from mass lamps and cobblestone streets and the sound of church bells on Sunday morning. Each mile took her deeper into a world that operated by different rules, where survival depended not on manners and social standing, but on strength and knowledge and the willingness to endure. Halfway up, Nevin rode alongside her. The trail had widened briefly into a flat stretch that crossed a frozen creek, and he used the opportunity to check on her with the quiet competence of a man accustomed to monitoring the welfare of living things. "You are doing well," he said. "Most city women would be crying by now." "I am not most city women," Sable replied. The words came out stronger than she felt, but she was learning that strength could be performed until it became real. He grinned. It transformed his face from intimidating to almost handsome, softening the hard lines, revealing the warmth he kept banked beneath his careful exterior. "No, I do not believe you are." When the cabin finally came into view, Sable's first thought was that it looked like something from a fairy tale. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines built from dark weathered logs that seemed to grow from the mountain itself. Smoke rose from a stone chimney in a thin, steady line, pale against the darkening sky. Snow covered the pitched roof in a thick white blanket, icicles hanging from the eaves like crystal daggers that caught the last light and threw it back in fragments. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Beautiful the way a wolf is beautiful, the way a winter storm is beautiful. Beautiful and dangerous and absolutely indifferent to the comfort of those who stood before it. Her second thought was that it was small, 2 stories, perhaps 3 rooms on each level for 4 people. Prentice dismounted and came to help her down. His hands spanned her waist completely as he lifted her from the saddle and set her gently on the ground. She swayed her legs unsteady after the long ride. He steadied her, those massive hands remaining on her waist longer than strictly necessary. "Welcome home," he said quietly. The word should have comforted her. Instead, it sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Because home implied permanence. Home implied belonging. And Sable did not yet know if she belonged here or if she had simply traded one form of captivity for another. But as she stood in the snow outside that cabin, held upright by the hands of a man she had met 30 minutes ago, looking at a life she could never have imagined from the parlors of Boston, she felt something unexpected stir beneath the fear. Possibility. The terrifying, exhilarating, utterly uncertain possibility that this place, these men, this life carved from wilderness and solitude might be exactly where she was meant to be. The door of the cabin opened, spilling warm light across the snow like a golden invitation. And Sable Ashford, who had run from a monster and traveled 2,000 miles on the strength of a letter full of lies, stepped inside to meet her future, whatever it might be. They let her inside. The main room took up most of the first floor, and it hit her senses all at once. The warmth first rolling over her frozen skin like a wave so sudden and complete that her eyes watered. Then the smell wood smoke and pine resin, and something savory simmering on the stove. The smell of a place where people actually lived rather than simply existed. Then the light golden and flickering from a huge stone fireplace that dominated one wall, its mouth large enough that a man could stand inside if he bent his head. A fire burned there now, casting long shadows across rough wooden floors, covered here and there with woven rugs in muted reds and browns. The rugs were worn thin in places soft with years of boots crossing back and forth across the same paths the geography of daily life mapped in threadbare patterns. A table stood near the window with 3 chairs tucked beneath it. 3, not 4. The absence of that fourth chair struck Sable with unexpected force. These men had lived with only each other for 8 years, had eaten every meal at this table, 3 chairs, 3 plates, 3 cups, the geometry of their isolation precise and unbroken. Until now. A simple kitchen area occupied another corner, a cast iron stove shelves holding dishes and supplies, a water bucket on a wooden counter. Everything was cleaned meticulously, so arranged with the particular orderliness of men who had little and took care of what they had. A bookshelf leaned against the far wall, its shelves holding perhaps 25 volumes with cracked spines. She could not read the titles from where she stood, but the fact of their existence surprised her. Books on a mountain, literature in the wilderness. It suggested depths she had not expected. In the corner, barely visible in the firelight, hung a small cross carved from cedar wood, suspended by a thin strip of leather from a nail beside the window frame. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every line perfect, every curve deliberate. Whoever had carved it possessed not just skill, but devotion, the kind of patient artistry that transforms wood into prayer. But what caught Sable's attention, what made her breath catch in her throat, was the doorway to the left and the name carved into the wooden beam above it. Verity. The letters were deep and clean, carved with the same precision as the cedar cross. Not scratched or rough, but deliberate, each letter formed with care and love, the way a man might carve a name into a headstone, which Sable realized was essentially what this was. A memorial, a marker for the dead built into the threshold of the living. Prentice followed her gaze. His expression shuddered, became unreadable, the openness she had glimpsed on the trail closing down like a window slamming shut against a storm. "That was my wife's room," he said. "It has been empty for 8 years. We cleaned it for you. I hope you will be comfortable there." Before Sable could respond, Nevin appeared with her bag. "Let me show you," he said gently. The room was small but adequate. A single narrow bed stood against one wall, its frame simple and sturdy, built from the same dark wood as the cabin itself. It was covered with a quilt in patterns of blue and gray, the stitching precise and beautiful with tiny flowers and geometric shapes interlocking in a design that must have taken months of careful work. A dresser beside the bed held an oil lamp and a small mirror. A shelf on the wall still held glass jars filled with dried herbs, their contents long past any use. The colors faded to the same dusty brown labels, written in a feminine hand, that had gone still 8 years ago. In the corner sat a wicker sewing basket, its lid closed pale with dust. Beside it, on a small wooden stand, a hairbrush with a few dark strands still caught in its bristles. A pair of leather gloves small enough for a woman's hands folded neatly on the window ledge. A pressed wildflower, papery and translucent, tucked between the frame and the glass of the mirror. Everything in this room had belonged to Verity. The quilt she had stitched, the herbs she had gathered, the brush she had drawn through her hair each night before bed, the gloves she had worn against the mountain cold, the flower she had pressed as a keepsake of some summer day that must have seemed at the time like it would last forever. And now it all belonged to Sable, a stranger sleeping in a dead woman's bed, inheriting a dead woman's life. Nevin set her bag on the bed. "We tried not to disturb her things too much, but if you want anything removed, just say so." Sable touched the quilt, feeling the careful stitches beneath her fingertips, each one placed with intention, each one a tiny act of creation that had outlasted its creator. "She made this, yes." Nevin's voice was soft with memory, and for a moment the gentle exterior cracked, revealing a grief that was still raw after all these years. Verity was good with her hands, sewing, carving, growing things. She loved this place, said it was the closest thing to heaven she would see on earth. How did she die? The question came out before Sable could stop it. She had not meant to ask, not yet, not within the first hour of arriving. But the room was full of Verity. The walls breathed her absence, and Sable needed to know what had happened to the woman whose place she now occupied. Nevin's expression darkened. That is Prentice's story to tell. But I will say this. Her death nearly destroyed us, all three of us. He left her alone then. Sable sat on the bed, still wearing her coat and gloves, and tried to process what was happening. She was in a cabin on a mountain 7 miles from the nearest town with three men who looked identical and who had all apparently loved the same woman. The woman whose room she now occupied, whose bed she would sleep in, whose ghost seemed to hover in every dust-covered corner like perfume that had soaked into the walls. She picked up the hairbrush from the dresser. The dark strands caught in the bristles were fine and silky. Verity had been dark-haired. Sable was blonde. The contrast felt significant, as if even their physical differences were a kind of commentary on the impossibility of what she was being asked to do, to step into another woman's life, to fill a space shaped by someone else entirely. She set the brush down and pressed her palm against the cold window glass. Outside, the clearing was filling with fresh snow, the light from the cabin windows casting golden rectangles across the white. Beyond the light darkness, beyond the darkness wilderness, beyond the wilderness nothing at all. She heard them talking in the main room, voices low but audible through the thin wall. The cabin had been built for shelter, not for secrets. Every word carried through the rough-hewn logs like whispers through a confessional. She is not what you said. You told us she was a sister. Older. Plain. That is what Mother Odette wrote. I did not know. She is beautiful. Young. And she came all this way alone. We cannot send her back. I am not suggesting we send her back. I am saying we need to be honest about what we want. We will be tomorrow. Tonight, let her rest. Let her adjust. She has had a long journey. A pause, then another voice, quieter than the others, carrying a weight that suggested the speaker understood exactly how dangerous his words were. Do you feel it? What I feel when I look at her? Yes, we all do. Silence. The kind of silence that follows a confession too honest for comfort. The kind of silence that means everything has changed and everyone in the room knows it, but no one yet has the courage to say what comes next. Footsteps approached her door. Sable stood quickly, smoothing her dress, trying to look composed despite the fact that her hands were trembling and her heart was hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. Prentice knocked softly. May I come in? Yes. He entered, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. In the small room, he seemed even more massive, his shoulders nearly spanning the width of the doorway, his head close to the low ceiling. There was barely space for both of them, and his presence filled what space there was, completely the warmth of him, the scent of wood smoke and pine and clean sweat, the sheer physical reality of a man built on a scale that made everything around him look miniature. I wanted to make sure you have everything you need. Fresh water in the pitcher chamber pot under the bed, extra blankets in the chest if you get cold. The temperature drops further after midnight, and we keep the fire going, but this room is the farthest from the hearth. Thank you. Sable clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. Mr. Calloway, I think we should talk plainly. Mother Superior's letter. It was not entirely truthful, was it? His amber eyes met hers directly. No, I am not a sister. I have never taken any vows. I assumed as much when I saw you. And I am not sick. My lungs are perfectly sound. Also assumed. Sable took a breath. So why did you agree to this? Why did you invite a stranger into your home based on a letter full of lies? Prentice was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved from her face to the quilt on the bed, to the jars of dried herbs on the shelf, to the name carved above the doorway that they both stood beneath. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, each word chosen with the deliberation of a man who understood that what he said next would determine everything that followed. Because I am lonely, because my brothers are lonely, because we have lived in this cabin for 8 years with only each other for company, and the silence has become unbearable. He looked at her with those intense amber eyes, and she saw in them something she had not expected. Not just hunger, not just desire, but desperation. The quiet desperation of a man who had been drowning slowly for 8 years and had finally seen something that might be sure. Because when Mother Odette wrote that a woman needed help, I thought perhaps we could help each other. Help how? The question hung between them. Outside, the wind had picked up, pushing snow against the window in soft whispers. The fire crackled in the main room. One of the brothers coughed. Prentice held her gaze. We need a wife, Miss Ashford, all three of us. And unless I miss my guess, you need husbands. Or at least you need to be beyond the reach of whoever you are running from. The air in the small room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Three husbands, Sable whispered. Yes, that is impossible, illegal, immoral. It is how we live. His voice remained calm, steady, as if he were explaining the workings of a clock, rather than proposing the most scandalous arrangement she had ever heard. It is how we loved Verity. It is how we would love you if you choose to stay. Sable's mind reeled. She thought of Osric Penhallow and his whiskey breath. She thought of Boston and its suffocating propriety. She thought of Mother Odette's words. Survive. Go west. Become someone he cannot reach. She thought of her father's inscription in the Bible. Freedom is not the absence of bonds. Freedom is choosing which bonds to accept. I need time, she managed. I need to think. You have until tomorrow evening, Prentice said. We will explain everything then. What we expect, what we offer. You will have a choice, Miss Ashford. You can accept and stay, or you can refuse, and we will take you back to Pine Ridge, give you money for passage wherever you want to go, and you will never see us again. He moved toward the door, then paused. His hand rested on the frame just below the carved letters of Verity's name. His fingers did not touch the letters, but they hovered there close, as if touching them was both a habit and a wound. But know this, if you stay, if you choose us, we will protect you, we will provide for you, we will share everything we have, including ourselves. You will never want for anything, and you will belong to all three of us, completely. He left before she could respond. Sable sat back down on Verity's bed and stared at Verity's sewing basket and Verity's herb jars and tried to imagine what choice she could possibly make that would not destroy her one way or another. Outside the small window, night was falling. The snow continued to fall with its silent, impatient, covering the world in white, erasing all the paths that had brought her here, leaving only the question of which path she would choose next. In the main room, she could hear the brothers moving around, the clink of dishes, the crackle of the fire, low voices discussing something she could not quite hear. And underneath it all, attention, anticipation, like the whole cabin was holding its breath, waiting for her answer. Sable pressed her hand against the cold window glass and wondered if she had finally escaped one cage only to enter another, or if perhaps she had found something she did not even know existed. Safety in the most dangerous place she had ever been, belonging in the arms of three identical strangers who looked at her like she was water in a desert. Tomorrow they would explain everything. Tomorrow she would have to choose. But tonight she sat in the darkness and did what she had always done when the world became too large and too frightening to face. She opened her father's Bible and read by the thin light of the oil lamp. She read until the words blurred and her eyes burned. She read until the lamp guttered and died. And then she sat in the darkness a little longer, listening to the wind outside and the fire beyond her door, and the breathing of three men who waited for her answer. Then in the near darkness, her hand found the sewing basket. She lifted the lid, not knowing what drew her to it, only that something did. Inside, beneath thread and needles and scraps of fabric, her fingers touched leather. Smooth and worn, the size of a small book. She pulled it out, held it close to the window where the faint, reflected glow of snow provided just enough light to see. A journal, small, leather-bound, filled with cramped handwriting. Verity's diary. Sable knew she should not read it. It was private, intimate, meant only for its author's eyes, a record of thoughts and feelings that belonged to a woman who could no longer guard them, who could no longer choose what to reveal and what to keep hidden. Reading it was a violation, a theft of the most personal kind. But her fingers moved without permission, opening to the first page. January 1st, 1862. Today, now I'm a married Prentice Calloway. I am the happiest woman alive. The handwriting was small and careful, the letters formed with the same precision as the quilt stitching, as the herb jar labels, as everything Verity had touched. A woman who paid attention to details. A woman who cared about craft and beauty even in the wilderness. Sable turned pages scanning entries. Verity's love for the three brothers shone through every word, her joy in this mountain life, her certainty that she had found something rare and precious and worth every sacrifice civilization demanded for its surrender. Entries about learning to fish, about the first time she shot a rifle and the bruise on her shoulder lasted 2 weeks, about the garden she planted and the deer that ate half of it and the fence Rafferty built that was so tall it blocked the sun, about winter nights by the fire reading aloud from books they passed between them, about the silence of the mountain and how it terrified her at first and then became the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. But as Sable read further as the pages turned from 1862 to 1863 and onward through the years, a darker thread emerged, faint at first like a minor key slipping into a melody so subtle it could be mistaken for imagination. A mention of Judson Farrow visiting while the brothers were away, polite at first, bringing venison, asking after her health. Nothing alarming, just a neighbor being neighborly. Then the visits became more frequent. The tone of the entries shifted. December 10th, 1869. Judson came again today. I told him to leave. He does not understand that I have made my choice. The brothers do not know he visits when they are away. I fear what he might do if I tell them. December 15th, 1869. Judson grabbed my arm today. Said I was wasting myself on 3 men when I could have one who would give me everything. I pushed him away. I am frightened. December 18th, 1869. I should tell Prentice. I know I should, but Judson said if I tell them, there will be blood. He said it calmly the way you might discuss the weather. I believe him. He is not a man who makes empty threats. December 20th, 1869. I have not seen Judson for 2 days. Perhaps he has given up. Perhaps I worried for nothing. The brothers are planning something for Christmas Eve. Prentice has been carving something in secret. Rafferty bought fabric in town for me, blue cotton, my favorite. Nevin is teaching me a new song on the harmonica. They are so good, so devoted. I do not deserve them. December 22nd, 1869. Judson was at the edge of the clearing today, just standing there, watching. When I went outside to confront him, he was gone. But the footprints remained. He had been there for hours. I can tell by how deep the prints were packed. Sable's hands shook as she turned to the final entry. December 23rd, 1869. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Prentice gave me a ring, a real wedding ring with a small garnet stone. He must have traded something valuable for it in town. Tonight we will have a private ceremony, just us four. Prentice and I will renew our vows, and Rafferty and Nevin will stand as witnesses, and as the husband society does not recognize, but God surely does. I am happy, truly happy. But I saw Judson outside the window tonight. His eyes, oh God, his eyes. They were empty, like he had already decided something. Like whatever was going to happen had already happened in his mind, and he was just waiting for the world to catch up. I am afraid. The entry ended there. Unfinished. Because the next day, Christmas Eve, Verity had walked into the snow and never come back. Sable closed the diary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the window, the same window where Verity had seen Judson watching. The glass was dark now, reflecting only the faint outline of her own face, pale and wide-eyed. And as if summoned by thought, a shadow moved in the darkness outside. A figure man-shaped standing at the edge of the clearing. Motionless, watching the cabin, watching her window. The cold that ran through Sable had nothing to do with temperature. The figure stood perfectly still for what felt like minutes, but might have been seconds. She could not make out features, could not even be certain it was real, and not a trick of shadow and snow and exhausted imagination. But something in the posture, in the absolute stillness, in the deliberate positioning at the exact edge of the clearing where the cabin light failed and the forest dark began, told her this was no phantom. Someone was watching, had been watching, perhaps had been watching for 8 years, waiting for the cabin to hold a woman again. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving only footprints in the fresh snow and the terrible certainty that whatever had killed Verity 8 years ago was not finished with the Calloway brothers yet. And now it knew about Sable. She pulled the quilt tight around her shoulders, Verity's quilt stitched by Verity's hands, and held the diary against her chest like armor. Outside, the snow continued to fall, patient and relentless, covering the footprints at the edge of the clearing, erasing the evidence of the watcher the way it had erased Verity's killer's tracks 8 years before. Sable did not sleep that night. She sat in the dark with her back against the headboard and her eyes on the window and her father's words repeating in her mind like a prayer that had lost its power to comfort. Freedom is choosing which bonds to accept. But what the inscription did not say, what her father could not have known when he wrote it, was that sometimes the bonds chose you. Sometimes the chains were already forged before you arrived, and the only question was whether you would be strong enough to bear their weight. Morning would come. The brothers would ask for her answer, and Sable would have to decide whether to stay in this cabin where a dead woman's name was carved into the doorframe and a killer still walked the mountain, or to flee back into a world where Osric Penhallow waited with forged documents and patient cruelty in a cage that would never open again. Either way, she was trapped. The only question was which trap she would choose, and whether any choice at all could save her from what was coming. In the main room, the fire burned low. The harmonica played one last mournful note and fell silent. The cabin settled into the deep quiet of a mountain night, the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of cold and darkness and the slow, patient turning of the world. And somewhere in the trees, boot prints filled slowly with fresh snow until they disappeared completely, as if no one had ever been there at all, as if the mountain itself was keeping secrets, as it always had, as it always would. Morning came gray and cold. Sable woke to the sound of movement in the main room, the scrape of a stove door opening, the clink of a coffee pot being filled, the low murmur of voices too quiet to distinguish words. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back, the diary still clutched against her chest, the image of that shadow at the edge of the clearing burned into the backs of her eyelids. And she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. She was in Verity's bed, in Verity's room. In a cabin with three identical brothers who wanted to share her the way they had shared their dead wife. The impossibility of it should have sent her running, should have driven her out the door and down the mountain and back to Denver on the first available stage. Instead, she found herself listening to those sounds beyond her door with something that felt dangerously close to curiosity. The rhythms of a household waking, coffee brewing, bacon frying, men moving through the familiar choreography of morning routine. Sounds she had not heard since her parents were alive. Sounds that meant home even when the home belonged to strangers. She dressed carefully in the same navy blue traveling dress, now wrinkled beyond repair. Her hair was a disaster, tangled from sleep and the long journey. She found a brush on the dresser, Verity's brush, the one with the dark strands still caught in its bristles. She hesitated, then used it, feeling strange, touching something so intimate that had belonged to the dead woman. With each stroke, she half expected to feel Verity's presence, some ghostly resistance to this intrusion. But there was nothing, just the soft pull of bristles through tangled hair and the quiet creak of the cabin settling in the cold. In the small mirror, her reflection looked pale, her blue eyes too large in her face, shadows beneath them from a sleepless night, but her chin was lifted, determined. Whatever happened today, she would face it with the dignity her mother had taught her and the courage her father had prayed she would find. She tucked the diary beneath the mattress. She was not ready to reveal it. Not yet. Not until she understood more about these men and the woman they had lost and the shadow that still haunted their mountain. When she opened her door, she found all three brothers in the main room. They had clearly been awake for hours. The fire burned high and hot, the flames throwing dancing shadows across the ceiling. Coffee steamed in tin cups on the table. The smell of frying bacon filled the air, rich and savory, making her stomach clench with sudden hunger. She had not eaten since a stale roll on the stagecoach the day before, and the aroma was almost painful in its appeal. Prentice stood at the stove cooking. Even from behind, she recognized him by the absence of a bandana. His broad back was covered by a flannel shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders, with every movement outlining the muscle beneath. He handled the cooking implements with surprising delicacy, cracking eggs one-handed, flipping bacon with a practiced wrist motion, moving between stove and counter, with the efficiency of a man who had cooked 10,000 meals in this exact kitchen. Rafferty sat at the table, whittling something from a piece of wood shavings falling to the floor around his boots like pale snow. His hands, enormous and scarred, moved the knife with a precision that seemed impossible for fingers that thick. The burgundy bandana was already tied around his neck, a splash of color against his tan skin. Nevin stood by the window looking out at the snow-covered world, a cup of coffee warming his hands. His navy blue bandana hung loose, and in the morning light his amber eyes caught the reflection of the white landscape outside and seemed to glow. He was the first to notice her. All three turned when they heard her door open. The attention was overwhelming. 6 amber eyes tracking her every movement as she crossed the room. She felt examined, measured, wanted, in a way that made her skin flush despite the cold, not the predatory calculation of Osric Penhallow, who had looked at her the way a miser looks at gold. This was something else entirely, something warmer and more dangerous. The gaze of men who had been empty for a very long time and who saw in her the possibility of being full again. "Good morning, Miss Ashford." Prentice's voice was carefully neutral. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough, thank you." The lie came easily. She was getting better at lying, which troubled her in a distant way that she did not have time to examine. Sable remained standing, unsure where to position herself in this bus space that belonged to them. The table had 3 chairs. 3 plates were already set. 3 cups already poured. The mathematics of their life did not include her. Nevin noticed her hesitation. He pulled out the chair closest to the fire and gestured toward it. "Please sit. You must be hungry." She sat. The chair was oversized, built for men with frames twice the width of hers, and she felt like a child perched at an adult's table. Within moments, a plate appeared in front of her. Bacon, fried eggs, thick slices of bread toasted on the stove. More food than she usually ate in a day. When she looked up to thank whoever had served her, she found all 3 of them watching with that same intense focus. "Eat," Rafferty said. It was not quite a command, but close. His voice was rougher in the morning, deeper, as if sleep had stripped away whatever thin layer of politeness he wore during waking hours. "You are too thin. City living." Sable picked up her fork with fingers that trembled slightly. "You are all staring at me." "Yes," Prentice agreed. He made no apology for it. She ate slowly, forcing herself to chew and swallow, despite the nervousness coiling in her stomach. The food was good, simple but well prepared. The eggs were cooked exactly right, the bacon crisp, the bread toasted golden. Someone in this cabin knew how to cook, and the care they had taken with this meal felt deliberate, an offering, a demonstration that they could provide. When she finished, Nevin refilled her coffee without being asked. He poured from the pot with one hand, his other hand resting briefly on the back of her chair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The gesture was domestic, intimate, in a way that unsettled her more than any overt advance would have. Finally, when she could delay no longer, she set down her cup and met Prentice's eyes directly. "You said we would talk today, about expectations, about what you want from me." "Yes." Prentice pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The chair groaned under his weight. Rafferty and Nevin moved to flank him, creating a wall of masculine presence that made Sable feel very small and very female. Not threatened exactly, but acutely aware of the physical imbalance between them. She was one woman average height, slender from years of Osric's controlled rations. They were 3 men who looked like they had been assembled from the same set of massive sun-hardened components. Prentice folded his hands on the table. "First, I need to know, are you running from something or someone?" Sable's throat tightened. She had not planned to tell them, not everything, not yet. She had planned to maintain the fiction of Mother Odette's letter for as long as possible, to keep her secrets close until she understood what kind of men these were. But looking at those 3 identical faces, at the intelligence in their eyes, at the quiet patience with which they waited for her answer, she knew they would accept nothing less than truth. And she was tired of lies, tired of the constant performance of safety, tired of pretending to be something she was not in order to survive. Someone, she admitted quietly, a man. "Osric Penhallow, he was my guardian after my parents died. He wanted to marry me, control my inheritance. When I refused, he became violent. I ran." Something dangerous flashed in Rafferty's eyes. His hand tightened on the knife he had been whittling with his knuckles going white. "Did he touch you?" The question was loaded. She understood what he was really asking. "Not in the way you mean, but he hurt me. Locked doors, controlled meals, hands that grabbed and threatened, and he would have done worse if I had stayed. Much worse." Nevin's jaw tightened the muscle working beneath the skin. He will not find you here. Are you certain? Sable asked. He has money, resources, connections in every city between here and Boston. He is the kind of man who does not accept losing what he considers his property. Prentice's voice was iron. The law reaches this far, but slowly, and men like us, we handle our own justice. If he comes, he will not leave this mountain alive. The certainty in his words should have frightened her. A man promising murder over breakfast should have sent her bolting for the door. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest, a knot that had been tied so tight for so long that she had forgotten it was there. Safety. For the first time in 2 years, the possibility of actual safety. Not the fragile safety of convent walls that could only protect her for 3 months. Real safety. The kind backed by 3 men with rifles and the willingness to use them. Now my question, Prentice continued. Mother Superior's letter said you were a sister, but you are not. You have taken no vows. No. She lied to protect me, to give me a way out that Osric could not follow. So you are free, legally, religiously, in every way that matters. I am still his ward until I turn 21 in March. But I have no husband, no vows, no obligations. Just a need to survive. Good. Prentice leaned forward slightly. Then I will be direct, Miss Ashford. We want you to stay, not as a guest or a housekeeper, as our wife. There it was, the offer laid bare. No decoration, no euphemism, no gentle approach. Just the raw truth of what they wanted, spoken with the bluntness of men who had lived so long without society that they had forgotten how to soften their desires into acceptable shapes. All 3 of you, Sable said. At once, yes. That is illegal. Polygamy is against the law in every territory. Rafferty spoke up, his rough voice matter of fact. The law says a man cannot have multiple wives. It says nothing about multiple husbands. That is semantics, perhaps, but out here the law is what we make it. No one will ask questions as long as we are discreet. Sable looked from one face to another. This is madness. How would it even work? Practically, I mean. 3 men and 1 woman in a cabin this size. How do you divide time, attention, affection? How do you prevent jealousy from tearing everything apart? Nevin's voice was gentle when he answered. We have done this before, Sable, with Verity, for 7 years. We learned. We made mistakes. We adjusted. But the foundation was always clear. She belonged to all of us equally. No one brother had more claim than another, and we shared everything. The work, the hardship, the joy. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. You would be wife to all 3 of us. You would share our lives, and we would provide for you, protect you, cherish you. You do not even know me. How can you want this? Prentice's eyes never left hers. We know enough. You are brave. You came 2,000 miles alone to escape a terrible situation. You are educated. I saw the Greek Bible in your bag. You are resourceful. You survived 2 years under a tyrant's control without being broken. That takes a kind of strength most men never develop, let alone a young woman alone in the world. He paused. And we are not asking you to love us, Miss Ashford. Not immediately. We are asking you to choose survival. To choose a life here where you will be safe and valued rather than whatever uncertain future awaits you if you leave. And if I cannot bear it, if I try and find I cannot live this way, then you leave. Prentice pushed back from the table and walked to a shelf. He returned with a small leather pouch and set it in front of her. The clink of coins was audible. $300. Enough for passage anywhere in the country and money to live on while you establish yourself. We give you 3 months. If at the end of that time you want to leave, this money is yours. No questions, no recriminations. Sable stared at the pouch. $300. More money than she had seen in her entire life. More than Osric had allowed her to touch in 2 years of guardianship. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear. Why would you do that? Give me so much and ask for nothing guaranteed in return? Rafferty leaned against the table, his massive arms crossed. Because we want you willing. A woman taken against her will is not a wife. She is a prisoner. We have no interest in prisoners. We want you to choose this, Nevin added, to choose us, every day, for as long as you stay. The words struck her with unexpected force. Choose us, every day. Not once, not in a ceremony that locked her into obligation, but continuously. a choice renewed each morning, a commitment that had to be earned rather than enforced. It was the opposite of everything Osric Penhallow had offered. The opposite of locked doors and controlled meals, and a guardian's legal authority wielded like a weapon. These men were offering her the one thing she had never had since her parents died: power. The power to stay or leave. The power to accept or refuse. The power of a woman who holds the key to her own cage and can open it whenever she chooses. Sable's hands trembled as she picked up her coffee cup, needing something to hold something solid and warm and real. "Tell me about her first," she said. "About Verity. If I am to live in her room, sleep in her bed, take her place, I deserve to know who she was." The brothers exchanged looks. Some silent communication passed between them, a language of glances and slight nods and almost imperceptible shifts of posture that had been developed over a lifetime of sharing the same face. Finally, Prentice nodded. "Her name was Verity Dunham before she married me." He corrected himself with emphasis. "Just me. She came west with her family when she was 18. They settled in Pine Ridge. Her father ran the general store. She was small, dark-haired, quick to laugh. She had a gift for making things beautiful. That quilt on your bed, the cross by the window, half the things in this cabin, she made them." His voice softened with memory, the iron giving way to something more fragile, more human. "I met her at a church social in 1861. I was drawn to her immediately. She had this way of listening to people, really listening, as if whatever they were saying was the most important thing she had ever heard. I thought I would court her, marry her, bring her here. I did not know my brothers had the same idea." Nevin took up the story. "We all loved her. The moment we saw her, we knew she was special. We thought we would have to compete, that she would choose one of us and the other two would have to live with the loss. The thought of it nearly tore us apart. For the first time in our lives, being identical felt like a curse, because whichever one she chose, the other two would have to watch someone with their own face be loved in a way they never would be. She told us she loved Prentice," Rafferty continued, "that she wanted to marry him. So Prentice courted her properly, asked her father's permission, married her in the church on January 1st, 1862, legal and binding. She was Prentice's wife." His voice grew rough. "But after the wedding, after they came here, Verity told Prentice she had feelings for Nevin and me as well. She said she had prayed about it, wrestled with it, fought it, but the heart does not obey the rules we set for it. She asked if we could all live together, if maybe over time she could be wife to all three. It took months to accept," Nevin said quietly. "We were raised to believe in traditional marriage. One man, one woman before God. But Verity was patient. She showed us that love did not have to follow society's rules, that we could build something different here, away from judgment. So we did." Prentice finished. "For 7 years, Verity was my wife legally. But in this cabin in our hearts, she belonged to all three of us. She gave herself to us without reservation, and we loved her more than life." The last 3 words fell heavy as stones. "What happened to her?" Sable asked softly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The fire still burned, the coffee still steamed, but something shifted in the atmosphere. A pressure change like the moment before a thunderstorm, when the air goes thick and still, and the birds stop singing. Prentice's face became granite, his hands clenched into fists on the table, the knuckles going white. The carefully maintained composure cracked, and beneath it was something raw, something wounded, something that had not healed in 8 years and might never heal. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched and stretched until it seemed like it would snap. Then in a voice rough with a pain that time had done nothing to diminish, "It was winter. 8 years ago this month, December 24th. The coincidence sent chills down Sable's spine. The same day she had arrived, as if the mountain operated on a cycle, drawing women to itself on the same date, the same season, over and over, offering them to the same cold and the same danger. Verity woke early that morning," Prentice continued. He was speaking to the table now. Not to Sable, his eyes focused on some point in the wood grain, as if he could see the past reflected there. "Said she wanted to gather firewood before we started cooking Christmas dinner. We told her no. The snow was too deep, nearly 4 feet in places. Dangerous. We would go. But Verity was stubborn, independent. She hated feeling helpless. hated being told what she could and could not do. A ghost of a smile crossed his face there and gone. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and one of the things that killed her. Nevin's voice was thick with grief. We were in the barn tending the horses, all three of us. We heard her leave the cabin, heard the door close, but we thought she was just going to the privy or checking the chickens. By the time we realized she had not come back, an hour had passed. Rafferty's jaw was tight, the muscle working beneath his skin like something alive and angry. We went out searching, calling her name. The snow was falling so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. We split up, covered every direction. I went north, Nevin went east, and Prentice went toward the creek. I found her. Prentice's voice had become something barely human. 100 yards from the cabin, face down in the snow, her hair spread out around her. I thought she had simply fallen, hit her head on a rock hidden beneath the white. I picked her up, carried her back. Her body was still warm. I thought I prayed maybe she was just unconscious. Maybe if we got her to the fire, got her warm, she would open her eyes and say my name and everything would be all right. His voice broke completely. But when Nevin examined her, when he removed her scarf, we saw them. Bruises, dark purple bruises in the shape of fingers wrapped around her throat. Someone had strangled her, then left her there to die in the cold. The horror of it stole Sable's breath. The image was unbearable. A small, dark-haired woman lying face down in the snow, bruises blooming on her throat like terrible flowers, while three men who loved her beyond reason searched the white wilderness, calling a name that would never be answered. Who, Sable whispered. Who would do such a thing, we do not know. The words were torn from Prentice. There were no tracks, the snow had covered everything. No one else lived on this mountain. The nearest neighbor was Judson Farrow, 5 miles away, and he swore he had not left his cabin that day. Judson Farrow. Sable's blood ran cold. The man from the stagecoach. The ice-colored eyes. The predatory stillness. The way Hollis Braxton had whispered about a woman who died in the snow under suspicious circumstances. And the diary entries. Judson's visits while the brothers were away. The grabbed arm, the threats, the shadow at the window on the night before Verity died. Sable knew, with a certainty that went beyond evidence, beyond logic. She knew. But she said nothing, not yet. The diary was hidden under the mattress, and the time to reveal it had not yet come. She needed to understand more, needed to know whether telling the brothers what she had found would bring justice, or simply unleash a violence that would consume them all. He loved Verity too, Nevin said quietly. Before Prentice married her, Judson asked her to choose him. She refused, told him she had already given her heart, but we never thought, we could not imagine he would. He could not finish the sentence. We buried her the next day, Rafferty continued, on the hill under the aspens. The frozen ground nearly broke our shovels. It took all three of us most of the day to dig deep enough, and we have lived with the guilt ever since. We should have gone with her, should have stopped her, Amanda, should have protected her. It was not your fault, Sable said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being, even though the words felt inadequate against the enormity of their grief. You did not kill her. Someone else did, someone evil. And that person, whoever they are the ones who should carry the guilt, not you. Something in Prentice's expression cracked. The granite face fractured along lines that had been forming for 8 years. And behind the stone was a man who had been carrying a weight no human being was built to bear. For the first time in 8 years since the day he had pulled his wife's body from the snow, Prentice Calloway wept. Great racking sobs that shook his massive frame, that seemed to shake the cabin itself, the grief pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. His brothers came to him, Rafferty on one side, Nevin on the other, their arms around his shoulders, their faces pressed close to his. They cried together. 3 identical men sharing identical grief, their tears falling onto the rough wooden table where they had eaten 10,000 meals without the woman they loved. And Sable held them all. She did not think about it, did not plan. It did not weigh the propriety of a woman she barely knew, embracing 3 weeping men. She simply stood and went to them and put her small hands on their massive shoulders and let them grieve. Her hands could not reach around even one of them, could barely span the width of a single shoulder, but the touch was enough, the presence was enough. The simple act of witnessing their pain and not turning away was enough. When the storm of grief passed, they sat together by the fire. Sable between Prentice and Nevin Rafferty standing guard at the window, as if expecting danger to arrive at any moment. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the snow had stopped, and thin sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning the clearing into a field of diamonds. "I have conditions," Sable said finally. "If I am to do this." Prentice met her eyes. His face was still wet, still raw, but the granite was reassembling itself, the composure returning piece by piece. "Name them. First, I want the 3 months you promised. At the end, I decide whether to stay permanently or take the money and leave." "Agreed." "Second, if I stay, you will treat me as an equal partner, not a possession. I will have a say in the decisions that affect me. I will not be told where I can go or what I can do. I left one cage in Boston. I will not enter another here." Rafferty turned from the window. His red-rimmed eyes held a respect that had not been there before. "Fair." "Third," she paused, gathering courage. "You will be patient with me. I do not know this life. I do not know how to chop wood or skin a deer or survive a winter on a mountain. You will have to teach me, and you will go slowly. I am a fast learner, but I will make mistakes, and I will not be punished for them." Nevin's voice was warm when he answered. "We will teach you everything, and we will be patient. You have our word." Sable took a deep breath. The air in the cabin felt different now. Charged, electric, as if the very molecules had rearranged themselves around the decision she was about to make. "Then I accept. For 3 months, I will be your wife." The change in the room was immediate. The tension that had stretched tight all day suddenly released like a bowstring, finally let go. Prentice stood slowly, and his brothers rose with him. They approached her together, moving with that eerie coordination that identical twins sometimes possess, but that in triplets became something almost supernatural. 3 bodies with one purpose, 3 hearts beating in unison. When they stopped in front of her, she had to tilt her head back to look at their faces. Even after hours of growing accustomed to their size, the sheer physicality of them was overwhelming. They blocked the firelight, casting her in shadow, and for a moment she felt like a small boat in the lee of 3 great ships. "You will not regret this," Prentice said. His hand rose, hesitated, then cupped her face. His palm was warm, calloused, impossibly gentle for something so large. "We will make sure of it." Rafferty's hand found her shoulder, his grip firm but careful. "You are ours now." For 3 months, she reminded him, though her voice came out breathless. For 3 months, he agreed, but his smile suggested he thought it would be much longer. Nevin stepped closer. "Are you frightened?" Sable considered lying, then decided on truth. These men had been honest with her. They deserved the same. Terrified. "Good. That means you understand what you have chosen. But Sable, we will earn your trust, day by day, until the fear is gone and only the choice remains." That night, she lay in Verity's bed and listened to the brothers move through their evening routine. The sound of water being poured for washing, the creak of floorboards as they walked, low voices discussing plans for tomorrow, and then later the sound of one of them playing a harmonica. The tune was mournful, beautiful, filled with a longing so deep it seemed to come from the mountain itself rather than from any human lung. She pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the flutter of nerves there. She had agreed to this, had chosen it. She would learn their world, their ways, and they would learn hers. And maybe in the learning, they would build something that honored Verity's memory without being imprisoned by it. The music faded. The fire died down. The cabin settled into silence. And beneath the mattress, Verity's diary waited patient as snow holding its secrets until the time came to reveal them. Until Sable was ready. Until the truth could do more good than harm. That time was coming. She could feel it the way you feel a storm building behind the mountains. The pressure in the air. The stillness that precedes the breaking. But not yet. Tonight she would simply rest. Tomorrow, her education would begin. And with it, the slow, careful, terrifying process of becoming something she had never imagined she could be. Not a possession, not a prisoner, not a frightened girl running from a monster. A wife, a partner, a woman who had chosen her own chains and found to her astonishment that they felt nothing like chains at all. They felt like arms. 3 pairs of arms, strong enough to hold her, gentle enough to let her go if she ever wanted to, which she was beginning to suspect she might not.